John Scott, Jonathan Acosta, and Vic Carucci coming out and joining the party here as it's the second week of Bills OTAs. And noticeably, the vibe a bit lower to be expected because Josh Allen, after getting married over the weekend to Haley Steinfeld, not present for the voluntary portion here. Pretty justifiable reason here. But the execution and, again, the feel of things around practice, noticeably different.
Well, first off, it's a summer practice, spring practice compared to training camp or preseason or whatever. So already the intensity is a little bit lower, you would say. But then you take out the MVP and you have Mitch Trubisky and Mike White over there. There's going to be a little bit different feel to it, especially when you know you have mandatory mini camp coming up the following week.
Yeah, the whole level of energy was lower. And I think I heard someone at one point say on the field that they were like at 75% in terms of the pacing of it, the tempo of it. It felt even lower than that, frankly. And yeah, the absence of the MVP is going to make that kind of difference. Josh, not only with his performance, but just his whole uplifting nature. That's what the natural leader of the team does. When you don't have him here, it's a different feel. Doesn't mean they weren't serious about trying to get things accomplished in practice, but as you said, a spring, summerish type of workout and a non-training camp variety.
And I don't have to be an expert to tell you, this team is a very different offense if Josh Allen, the MVP of the league, is not the one throwing the football. So we didn't really learn anything new from there. And again, no overreactions in terms of if something should happen to Josh and Trubisky or Mike White happen to be the ones that had to be thrust into action. I take nothing from what I saw here this afternoon to make me go one way or the other about how the offense could perform. No James Cook, once again, to be expected, and we heard a little bit from all of the coordinators today. Joe Brady with some good thoughts about the way Ray Davis has taken advantage of Cook's absence through the spring.
And really, it was a general comment, first off, in terms of like anytime a guy goes from being a rookie to the second year, that second year jump, them getting a full offseason, not having to worry about a Senior Bowl or a bowl game, the combine, the draft process. They really get to be in here in the spring, working out, already have a year of development in the playbook. And I think Ray Davis showed a lot of promising signs last year. Different role than a Ty Johnson, who's the third down back, a guy more sort of to spell Cook when he needed to. But we saw him make an impact for this team and score important touchdowns. And I think Bills fans should be excited about the potential that Ray Davis has as a guy with a low center of gravity, but can catch the ball, pass block, run the ball well behind this offensive line. So the comments from Brady in terms of taking advantage of these extra reps, because you would assume maybe that James Cook will be here for mandatory minicamp, but that's something that we don't know. So for a guy in his spot to really go out there and make the most of these extra reps.
Well, first of all, guys, it's not an overstatement to say this is one of the better running back rooms in the NFL with James Cook in that room. But because there is Ray Davis, because you have Ty Johnson and the collective trio, I mean, I'll stack them up with some of the better running back rooms in the league. And I know the Lions are on that list, for instance, and I don't think it's an overstatement. Combined with one of the better offensive lines in the league that has great continuity, contributes to that rushing success. The dynamic talent that Cook has, you can feel it when it's not here. Not quite the same feeling as no Josh Allen, but it's still a feeling when you take him away from the offense. He's going to be with this football team. He probably does show up next week for mandatory minicamp. Why pay the fine? The statement's been made about what you want to do. And this is what players do in the NFL. They make their statements by holding out of voluntary workouts. Big deal. The team understands that too. I don't think any grudge is held against him. He shows up when he shows up, again, presumably next week, and then he plays this season, and it's up to him to just prove whatever that number is going to ultimately be for him, either to be with the Bills or somewhere else.
Vic, I'm going to go right back to you because Jonathan and I have seen Keon Coleman now for a week. This was your first look at the latest version of him after an offseason of critical comments from both Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. Did anything stand out that was different?
I mean, the physical look of him, that's striking. You know, the bigger sort of arms, thicker body in general, more body armor, if you will, that he has. As far as movement, separation, I didn't see anything there that struck me as being all that impressive. I did like that he did, on one play, gain a step or two against Max Hairston. Unfortunately for him, on a sideline route, the ball goes right through his hands. But the ball was placed right where it needed to be. He was right where he needed to be. Just didn't make the catch. Overall, I think there's still some growth development that needs to happen in his game, not so much in his body, but in his game.
Tre'Davious White did say after practice that from what he saw on film before their meeting in the postseason to what he's seen live in action in front of him, he noted the size. He did say the route running he feels is an improvement there, and it was not like people were guiding him to say, oh, is he a better route runner? Oh, is he a bigger? It was more of a, what have you noticed? And so that, I think, is a little bit noteworthy for a guy that wasn't here a year ago, was just seeing things on film and now sees him in person.
And that backs up the comments from Sean McDermott last week where he said to this point in the offseason he was proud of the work that Coleman had done both in the weight room and outside of the weight room in terms of his technique and everything.
You got the message from the coach. I mean, I'm sorry, that was not typical of Sean to necessarily call out a guy publicly, and when he does, and when Brandon Beane does, it's done with a purpose.
And Dalton Kincaid was also in that same boat, and Bobby Babich, or I shouldn't say Bobby Babich, Joe Brady saying that he felt Kincaid was, quote, living here this offseason as he, physically wise, also looks to be bigger and have gotten the message.
And that's something that when we caught up with Deion Dawkins, he talked about how Kincaid sort of seems to be himself and is in good spirits here. So I think that's something that bodes well. Again, a big talking point as we continue through OTAs, minicamp, training camp is going to be Dalton Kincaid and Keon Coleman, two picks that were high for this team, significant draft capital invested in them. And when you think about a Bills offense that wants to go out and score 30 points per game again, a lot of that is going to depend on Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid, both of them elevating their game from what they produced last year.
I thought Kincaid, just the way he ran, showed it was doing so with a purpose. He seemed to be fully engaged in everything. I'm not saying he's a laissez-faire kind of player, but there were times when he just would disappear, and you wonder, okay, what's missing here? What I saw out there, and again, gauging almost nothing of value from non-contact spring workouts, but just paying attention to the basic things like his running, like his strides, the way he caught the ball in movement, positioning, getting himself in the right spots to make those catches, all noticeable and all good.
We'll wrap things up on the offense. I'll just note Spencer Brown did not practice. Don't know what he's dealing with, but he was the one guy on the offensive line who was not participating. Let's go to the defense, and you had an eye on defensive backs as well, and I know, Vic, this was your first look at Max Hairston and the way that he was moving, and we heard things like from Bobby Babich beforehand, he's slowly starting to get a good enough grasp on the defense to have that speed actually be a factor. What did you see in the way he's moving?
Yeah, and Babich was very clear to say that there's a difference between, we know this, it's not a cliche, it's a fact, that football speed versus track speed. He's got all the track speed you could want. We know that, Max Hairston does. But in terms of football speed, what will reduce it is hesitation. And I saw the hesitation today. I saw a guy who definitely isn't entirely sure of where he was going, where he was supposed to be at times. And when he was sure, then that natural fluid speed showed up. So I think it's still a raw talent that needs to be honed. It'll be interesting once, and we're not going to see it out here, once they're in pads, what kind of effort does he put into contact and being in run support? Those are the questions that were hovering overhead from him coming out of college.
And one of the specific terms that Bobby Babich brought up was processing, that when the processing slows down, then that's when the play speed sort of improves, right? And I think that's something that doesn't just apply to Hairston, but it's something that we saw, for example, another guy in the secondary like Cole Bishop last year, where they have all this talent, but it takes them a while, especially at their position, to sort of get up to speed with the defense, what the coaches want them to do and everything. And so even though they might have this 4.3 speed like Max Hairston does, you don't really get to see it until they feel comfortable in the system where they can really go out and show it.
And the Bills are not in the position as a team, as a Super Bowl contender, to deal with some of the miscues that a rookie is going to present, especially when you have other options that can hold down the fort until they are actually ready. At the cornerback position, I'm going to say that's Tre'Davious White. He's maybe not Tre'Davious White, first-team All-Pro, first time around with the Buffalo Bills, but I think if I'm a betting man right now, week 1 against the Baltimore Ravens, his former team, I think Tre'Davious White is going to start alongside Christian Benford.
That makes total sense, John. Let's remember, this team is a finished product. They're really not in the process of building something. It's been built. But I say that knowing it, there is going to be change. There is turnover. It happens every year with every team, the best of teams, even the Philadelphia Eagles, the defending champs, the Chiefs, and all their championship runs. But as a whole, this team is already playoff ready, already Super Bowl challenger ready. It's just these finer points that have to be worked out. And you're right, don't leave it to chance, a critical position like starting cornerback. And Tre'Davious White, maybe not at his all-pro best, but still probably good enough. This assumes he can hold up with his health, but just watching him, there's a natural comfort that he has. He too was out of position on a couple of plays and had to be coached in because the defense has changed a bit since he was here the first go-around.
And Cole Bishop, you mentioned, is a guy that a lot of people just slotting in there next to Taylor Rapp. I think it's a safe bet, but he has to prove it. Bobby Babich saying he's seen growth in his understanding, and that's the big key for the safety position in particular. Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, I think, maybe made us forget how challenging it can be because they were just so good and had such an incredible grasp on the defense. A true definition of set it and forget it at the back end here. Now the transition period away from them, a couple years removed. You even saw it from Taylor Rapp year 1 to year 2. Last year he was significantly better than the first year, and Rapp saying, hey, I feel even better entering my third year, second year as a starter. We're seeing and hearing that Bishop is in the same boat early, albeit here in OTAs.
Well, and it's a discussion that sort of wraps into what we're talking about with Hairston and Tre'Davious White, where you have a team that is this good and already sat so many positions. The few question marks, do you go with the talent, knowing that maybe as a rookie they're going to make rookie mistakes, how costly are those going to be to your team? Or do you go maybe with the veteran that knows where they're supposed to be and you can at least count on that aspect? That's what we saw last year with Damar Hamlin, I think, taking over the safety position where, you know, maybe his ceiling isn't as high as Cole Bishop's, but you sort of know the product. You know what you're going to get out of that. I think now with Cole Bishop getting a full offseason here, being a lot more comfortable with this play, especially at safety, one of the most difficult positions, I think, on the entire team to really get as a rookie, something that Sean McDermott and Bobby Babich both alluded to. I think you start to see him a little bit more comfortable. And Damar Hamlin wasn't out there on the field today, so that's a situation where Bishop gets those extra few reps alongside Taylor Rapp, the guy that he would be starting next to if he's starting this season.
And with all of these questions, or depending on their varying sizes of questions, but questions that might linger with personnel and the younger players that are out there, it puts a lot more on this coaching staff, this defensive staff, Bobby Babich and crew, Sean McDermott, the whole side of the defensive, the whole defensive side of the football, to get it right with these players, to coach them up to where they need to be. I think this could very well be one of the most critical coaching years on the defensive side.
Damar Hamlin, I'll call it a boot. It wasn't a full boot. He had a version of a boot on his foot. That's why he was not out there. On the defensive line, no Joey Bosa. That's to be expected. Did see him out there, though, at least at the later portion of practice. No sleeve or anything on the calf, but just walking around on the sidelines. But defensive line continues to be a focal point because with Bosa's uncertainty, you got some suspended guys here. We're still trying to figure out how this is all going to get shaken out and the deck's going to be shuffled. Your first time again seeing at least some of these guys in person. What were your takeaways?
I was impressed with just the general movement. Again, it's all choreography. There's not contact and there's not the real push that a defense is going to show you if they have it. But I do like, even from some of the younger players, the certainty of movement. Everybody was really where they needed to be. I didn't see a lot of coach correcting going on when I watched those individual sort of sessions with the defensive line crew. It seemed like everybody was tuned in and doing things the right way. When things get stopped and have to be corrected, and this staff will do that, that's when you say, okay, you got some raw people that need to be kind of straightened out. It's interesting. There's still enough of a core of veteran players, even though they're younger guys like Greg Rousseau, Ed Oliver, AJ Epinesa, that are still those core veterans. And I watched how they were talking to some of the younger players.
You heard from Bobby Babich, Landon Jackson be spoken about in particular here, because maybe among anyone on that defensive line, he has a great opportunity now with Bosa's injury, and Bobby Babich seems to like what he's seen, at least initially.
Well, and before we really dive deep into Jackson, it's Bosa's injury combined with Michael Hoyt's suspension. So even Babich had to talk about sort of getting this defense ready in terms of getting guys up to speed, but then once a guy like Michael Hoyt's not able to be here, he has to be able to adjust. So you combine Bosa with Hoyt, a big opportunity for Jackson. Babbage said they loved the size on his tape when they were watching him in the draft process, and then you see him in person, and it's just something that
He's
stands
imposing
out to you right away. Exactly.
Even without pads on, it's
He's a big
imposing.
man. Yeah.
And it's something that Sean McDermott's touched on before, the maturity. He's married. Jackson says, I go play ball, go home to my wife, and that's about it. I think that maturity standpoint is something that this team loves and something that's been reinforced by both McDermott and Babbage. And then Babbage added that he sees him as a true three-down player. So taking all of that into consideration, it really feels like Jackson has an opportunity to where if he kind of comes out here, and he was productive at Arkansas, I think 6.5 sacks each of his last 2 seasons there. So he's someone that I think this team kind of views of, we're not going to put too much on his plate as a rookie, but if he goes out there and plays the way we think he can, he might get a little bit bigger of an opportunity than maybe as expected.
When I was referencing the younger guys that weren't getting a lot of immediate correction, he was one of the first I was thinking of. It just seemed like he knew what he was doing. Again, it's a new defense to him, a new situation. I am not saying he's got anything figured out as a rookie, especially in OTAs. But I saw an assurance, a self-assurance. And sometimes if you glean anything out of these sessions, that's one of the biggest, is the body language, and listen to the conversations. I'm kind of big on the listen to the sideline conversations, what players say to each other after a play, how they were correcting a discipline. There's a certain way you've got to walk off the field after your group comes off and comes on, and a couple of players were asked by other players to go back and do it again in the last 5 or 6 yards. I was waiting to be told that too, but hopefully I got it down.
I'll just make one note that I actually didn't even realize until I went back to the film of last week. Deion Walker was participating, something I think we maybe didn't expect, at least at this point. Maybe he'd get a little bit of work in as we reached mandatory minicamp, but he was participating last week during OTAs. I saw him back out there again. And you talk about a large human being, Deion Walker is absolutely that. We're transitioning to mandatory minicamp next week. I'm going to take off the table Josh Allen's return and James Cook's presence, I think is the one that is, those are the number 1 and number 2 storylines here. What are you going to have your eyes on during our final 2, maybe 3 days of seeing this team before they break for ahead of training camp?
Honestly, what the receiver rotations look like out there. Obviously, Josh Palmer and Elijah Moore, 2 additions that a lot of people are excited about. So I want to get a look at the receivers. Then I think on the ends, on the defensive line, obviously Epinesa and Greg Rousseau return as kind of the known commodities, but you have a second-year player like Javon Solomon that showed some flashes. You have a rookie like Landon Jackson, Michael Hoyt, who we know is going to miss the first 6 weeks, but after that, you expect him to come in and contribute. So I just want to see how that shakes out and how some of those younger guys, specifically like Solomon and Jackson, how comfortable they're looking there, maybe with elevated opportunities.
Yeah, look, when it comes to James Cook, on the assumption he is there because he doesn't want to be fined, okay, how there is he? Like, what's his level of presence? I like that word, John. His level of presence in those workouts. And what I mean by that is, remember, him missing the OTAs is a business decision. To what extent will the business decision take him? Because his leverage is his performance, his body, his health. And the last thing in the world, of course, anybody wants for anybody, regardless of contractual issues, is any injury that comes up before the season. So, to what extent is he going to be expending his energy level and participation, back to watching body language and everything else, carrying himself, how he carries himself. And we'll see that in training camp as well. Those are some of the things that'll be in the back of my mind, I'm sure, in the back of the collective mind of everyone watching this team.
I don't think they'll just instantly, oh, you arrived after missing all this time and Ray Davis has been taking this and Ty Johnson's been here. Don't expect James Cook to get the lion's share of things. You have to earn that, and that's something that it's not going to be a punishment from Sean McDermott or the coaching staff. It's simply going to be, you weren't here, these guys we're up to speed at this point, and even if physically you have been working out and are fine, we'll have you on the field, but just don't expect it to be that way. For me, I'm just going to keep my eyes on the secondary. I just think that's honestly the most interesting position type conversations. It's because Taylor Rapp's there. How does Cole Bishop look? Is DeMar Hamlin back on the field? At the cornerback spot, we've talked about Harrison. We've talked about Tre'Davious White. And even Dane Jackson, they made it a point a week ago to say, hey, we're just going to kind of mix and match people, all of that. And Hairston, I'm not saying he's going to get buried like a Kyer Elam did a couple of years ago, but Dane Jackson knows the defense, Tre'Davious White knows the defense, and especially at this point in time, they're going to give the rookie opportunities as it is earned, but they're going to also put the people out there who know what they're doing better than others. So just something to keep an eye on that we will then put in the back of our pockets, go away for a bit, and then head to training camp along with Hard Knocks at the end of July.
Cameras.
With Vic Carucci, Jonathan Acosta, I'm John Scott for Channel 2 Sports.